Conspirinormal, where the nexus of conspiracy theory and the paranormal meet. And now, we join the show already in progress with your hosts, Adam, Serfiel, and Rob.
All right, welcome to Conspirinormal, guys.
Good to be back.
Yeah, Rob's back.
Was it gone last week? I was.
You were gone last week, yeah. Is it all just melding together, Rob?
Life just is all melding together into this
gelatinous mass.
It's just flashes of color and senses, and yeah, time is ridiculous lately.
Mm-hmm.
Months are flying by.
Yep. And Serfiel's here.
Yes, and I brought us all a nice treat. We're indulging in some Cuban cigars.
Yeah, I mean, these are awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Yes, I'm forever in your debt.
And Rob, you got 3 more out of it, too.
Well, those are for all of us.
That's for later, yeah.
And joining us on the line, guys, we've got David Metcalfe, who I also got the privilege to hang out and had some fascinating conversations with at the Paramania event. David, welcome to Conspirinormal, man. It's been a long time
Thanks,
coming.
man. Yeah, this is great. I'm excited to have a chance to continue our conversation and expand on it. Mm-hmm. It's very good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for coming on. You know, you and I were talking when we were there about, because I'd heard a couple, maybe like 1 or 2 interviews with you before about Santa Muerte. And I know that you are kind of an expert on this, that you know a lot about it. And it's something that I've always kind of been wanting to explore on the show. And so let's kind of just get into this. What is Santa Muerte, and how did you become interested in exploring this and talking about it?
Yeah. Well, Santa Muerte is a folk saint out of Mexico, represented by a grim reaperess. So she's female in her representation. Also sometimes represented as a skeletal bride. There's a bunch of, at this point, there's a ton of different reaper and skeleton, like female skeleton iconography that go along with her. And she fits within the folk Catholic kind of milieu where, you have your standard Orthodox saints, the saints that are accepted by the church, the Roman Catholic Church. And then in most of, most areas that are heavily Catholic also have what are known as folk saints, which are saints that emerge from popular devotion. So they're saints that come about through, the people giving them devotion and claiming that the saint provides some sort of miraculous intervention in their life. And Santa Muerte is unique in that there's no person behind Santa Muerte. It is death itself. So in Mexico and throughout Latin America at this point, and then actually globally now, Saint Death has arisen as, this figure that people are paying devotion to. I've done a long-term project since 2013, kind of tracking the growth of Saint Death's devotions globally, with Dr. Andrew Chestnut, who's the chair of Catholic Studies at Virginia Commonwealth University. And he posits that there's, at least in Mexico alone, there's over 10 million devotees, and probably more. Since it's a folk saint and it's a popular saint, it's kind of hard to get numbers, but one of the ways that he's tracked it in the States is through shops which are called botanicas, which serve Latin American communities, mostly Santeria. Devotees go there to get their stuff, but also most botanicas kind of serve everyone in the Latin American community with, herbal remedies and limpidas, which is a bath, like a cleansing bath, and that, anything you would need for your, your spiritual health, they cover, and also physical health as well to some extent. So evil eye charms and stuff like that. But he's done a study of botanicas looking at sales of Santa Muerte, and at this point, a lot of botanicas will say that 50% of their sales are Santa Muerte. So you have, you can see just in that alone that this devotional tradition is huge, even in the States. So there's devotees that we've talked to in the UK, Australia. His book, Devoted to Death, it's got a Polish edition. There's a naturalized Saint Death in the Philippines, which is very similar to the Mexican tradition, which came about within the Philippines, not from Mexico necessarily, but those two have started to bridge thanks to the internet.
What do you mean by naturalized?
Well, so the Philippines, what Santa Muerte came out of, it's a really interesting, I think a lot of people would call it syncretic, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. And the syncretic tradition is where you've got, Catholicism comes in or another religion comes in, and then the religion that's already there starts to blend. But Santa Muerte is really unique in how that syncretism has happened. So as far back as the Inquisition records, there's records of, the First Nations people in Mexico actually worshiping a form of Santa Muerte as a Catholic saint, but basically coming out of their relationship with passion plays. So a passion play is a play that kind of retells the story of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. And, back then they would have, and still in mainly Catholic countries, meaning that countries that have like a strong base of Catholicism, they'll have these plays that have, it's a reenactment of the crucifixion, and they're very elaborate and, they'll march through the streets. I mean, it becomes this huge festival kind of thing. And they would have a figure that would basically be a Grim Reaper that would come, when he dies, and then when he conquers the Grim Reaper, that would be acted out in the play. And so when it was brought to the Americas, some of the people would actually start to see that as a sanctified figure. And there's examples of this in Europe as well during the plague periods, where people did have prayers to Saint Death to keep death away. So there's an interesting kind of like European tradition as well that never really took off in the way that it took off in Latin America. But so you've got Inquisition records that mention Santa Muerte. In the 40s, you have records of her novenas, which are a 9-day prayer. And by the time it got to the 40s, she was a love saint. So she was actually used, the novena is to bring a wandering husband back. So it would be, a wife or a girlfriend, a partner that felt like they were being spurned. They would do this novena and try to bring their wandering lover back. And then in the late 80s, you see Santa Muerte again in photos from a fellow named Adolfo Constanzo, who was a sorcerer for the Cartels. And he practiced a very heavily mixed blend of Palomayombe and Santeria, and he claimed initiation into Haitian voodoo houses. But he was kind of a sorcerer for hire for the Cartels. And in the photos from his arrest, he killed a Brownsville student, University of Texas, I think, a student from Brownsville. He killed him, and that led to a kind of manhunt to find out where the kid went, and that led to Adolfo's arrest and the discovery of this kind of sorceress cult that was surrounding him, that was doing work for the cartels. And in the press photos for that, you see a statue of Santa Muerte in the background. And then in 2001 is when we see what we have now, the popular tradition now, when a lady named Dona Queta in Tepito, in Mexico City, she had a familial devotion to it. At that point, it was a really underground tradition. And her son was, I think he was stabbed in the head in some kind of gang violence. And she had petitioned Santa Muerte for his healing. And her son made it through. And as a thanks to Santa Muerte, bought Dona Queta a life-size skeleton effigy, which was too big for her room. So she brought it out into a glass case in front of her shop. And that became the center point for kind of the spread that we see now in the popular devotions. And that was in 2001. And, before that, it was very underground. It hadn't really taken off. When she did that, it hit at the right moment, and it was just a spark, and people started wearing their amulets and stuff in public, more on display. So it exploded out of that. But so it's got these different points in time where it pops up. What we see now is a massive, mostly thanks to the internet. It's global spread. And then, kind of just the culture has a place for her right now. So
I think maybe Breaking Bad might have helped a little bit too.
Yeah,
It's
Breaking
kind of
Bad
exploration of the Mexican drug cartels, and you saw Santa Muerte a lot in that series.
Yeah, the TV show, and there's other examples of her too in popular culture. Catherine Ironwood, prior to Breaking Bad, she runs Lucky Mojo Curio Company. And so kind of the neo-hoodoo movement and the neo-conjure movement, she was selling Santa Muerte items out of her shop and had some discussions on her message board about it. And there's other examples of folks that I've talked to that, they were working in restaurants in New Orleans, and the cooks were devotees. So, and then that was the other thing. Her, at this point, she's kind of a patroness of lost causes. And one of the other, outside of cartels and that, you saw her in folks that were crossing the border would have chaplets, and little amulets and stuff as a kind of like, I hope if I do die in the desert, I die well, and hopefully I don't die. So they would petition Santa Muerte to help them get over. And I've talked to folks that were, folks from Mexico that knew of her as the kind of love spell and love sorceress. So, but Breaking Bad as a popular kind of touch point definitely did have a large, it made her much more visible. But also the growth of kind of the new age occult movement that we have now, she's really taken off through that as well.
Just to go back a little bit, Tepito, this area in Mexico City, is apparently probably one of the most dangerous areas or most high crime area. But so I was reading a little bit about her in the Wikipedia article about Santa Muerte, and we'll talk about the link to criminality in a little bit. But there's also people that like work at night, people that like taxi drivers, like police officers even, that venerate her, that see her as some kind of protector. And she's also very huge and kind of like the sex worker and the kind of like and also kind of like the LGBT. So she kind of has this appeal to a lot of these kind of like groups that are kind of like on the liminal fringes.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And, Tepito has actually been a black market since the Aztec period. So its history as it's also called the Barrio Bravo. So the danger, the strong neighborhood, but really the dangerous neighborhood. She is kind of seen as a protectress. So, anyone who's in an occupation that's going to put them in danger, like taxi drivers or prostitutes, Santa Muerte is it's Saint Death. So, as Andrew talks about it, who better to talk to kind of keep death at bay than death, and she plays a large part in that. And it's interesting with the LGBT community because Arlie, who's a devotee up in the Bronx, she's trans, and she actually went to Santa Muerte after being terrified by Santa Muerte and not wanting nothing to do with it. She turned to Santa Muerte after she was rejected by the Catholic Church. She went into I think she went into confession, and the priest told her, "We don't want you here. Like, you have no place in the church. Get out." And she had some dreams, I believe, and then about Santa Muerte, and started petitioning Santa Muerte, and ended up becoming a U.S. citizen. And she has a beautiful life in the Bronx now, and a husband, and she's super happy. And she says that was all from Santa Muerte.
Yeah, so it's not just a negative. It's not just like a negative connotation, which I think a lot of people in the United States see it as that the whole skeleton aspect, and because it looks like the Grim Reaper. And
yeah, no, and that's in Mexico the death culture is completely different. As well, throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, the death culture is completely different, and the way they look at death is completely different in the culture. So it doesn't have quite the connotation down there. Now, if you talk to folks from Mexico about Santa Muerte, you're either going to get a neutral opinion where they're like, I haven't even really heard of that, or a positive opinion, depending on like what their social level is, or you're going to have a complete horrified, get away from me, don't ever mention that name, that's horrible. I don't want anything to do with that. So it's interesting that, the kind of the bad name that she has in the States through a lot of kind of lurid news reporting is also prevalent in Mexico as well. There's a lot of people, I've had instances where I've started talking about it, and like, that was definitely not the right thing to say. And it really made some people uncomfortable. So, her bad reputation is not isolated to the U.S.
Well, and like, I guess she appeals to a lot of these marginal people because of this. I've heard you talk before about she's got this neutrality to her because I guess death is like the grand leveler. And so she has a neutrality and I guess a kind of non-judgmental way that does attract both people on the margins and criminals to her. And then the media picks up on seeing criminals being devotees, and they're like, oh, well, it's a criminal cult, when it's really just a kind of a neutral thing.
Yeah, and that's that it's that's very highlighted. A lot of devotees will talk about that neutrality in that, and the neutrality does play into the fact that she's known as the saint that you go to if you couldn't. There's a couple different ways that people turn to her. One of which is that they've prayed to all the other saints and it wouldn't work. It was a legitimate prayer. Like, she's really big over addictions. So folks will, addicts will pray to her and they won't get a response. And so, addicts will pray to, Virgin of Guadalupe, or they'll pray to one of the other standard saints, and they won't get a response. And then they'll turn to Santa Muerte and they'll get a response in their experience. And so that she's become known as, the saint that will come through when the other saints won't. And then also because of that neutrality, some folks will pray to her for things that they couldn't pray to other saints for, that like just would not be, they wouldn't be acceptable to pray to, the Virgin of Guadalupe to make sure that you didn't get caught when you were stealing or something like that, or kidnapping or something, or drug running or whatever. And it's, in a technical religious studies sense, there's multiple different Santa Muertes, basically, in terms of how the devotions are done. And the narco element and the kind of criminal element is almost a different saint in terms of how it's approached, and the way that it's approached, and how it's kind of pictured. In the criminal sort of sense, there's the idea that she's also very vengeful. So if you ask something from her, you better do what you said you're going to do to pay off the debt. And if you don't, there's stories about relatives dying, before their time, or, you'll get paid back in some way that's horrible if you don't pay your debt to Santa Muerte. And then there's the non-criminal variant. Oftentimes that's not really, there may be some sense of that where, like, you've got to make sure you pay your debts, but it's not quite as violent or scary.
Well, it seems like the criminal interest may be in that it has some utility in, like, creating some cohesion or sense of duty in some of these criminal organizations. And it's a way of, like, cloaking the criminal organization in some kind of, some kind of metaphysical or spiritual aspect to it. So is that kind of what we're seeing in, like, the media and stuff? They're discovering this because it's being used as a tool by these criminal networks to kind of, like, I guess kind of for, like, mind control in a way, like for cohesion and for creating more of a sense of duty.
Yeah, and there's a fellow, Robert Bunker, who's an analyst that works for the Army War College. He was the futurist in residence for Quantico, which is the FBI's training facility. And he's done a lot of studies on the criminal element of it. And one of his, I think the book is called Blood Sacrifices or something like that. But it's basically about what we're seeing now is a kind of global movement of his technical term for it is dark magico-religious practices. And so I think one of the things that most folks probably don't understand is that when you have criminal gangs or you have organized crime, there's oftentimes religious, magical religious sense to it, where petitionary prayer is done, or petitionary spell work is done to protect and to harm opponents, or to get some divination to see if you're going to be okay, or if your drug run's going to go okay, or whatever. So in that sense, she plays into that tradition of being one of the most powerful saints you can use, in spell work and that to contact and kind of, work that type of magic. And so, again, the criminal variety is very much within this tradition of sorcerers for hire, that, black magic and the way that people would think of it, from, like, the movies and stuff. And so she's used, in that sense to kind of hurt opponents or protect your own people, and a lot of the cartels have patron saints. So the folk saint tradition within the cartels and that has emerged, so that the Knights Templar cartel had the son Nazario, who was their founder, and once he died, maybe he seems to have died a couple times. But when he may or may not have died, he became sanctified by them as San Nazario. And he was basically the icon for him was a knight, a Knights Templar knight. And they would pray to him for protection. And so Santa Muerte has come up as, a pretty good icon for criminal gangs in that sense, but what, for the most part, what you, for, when Andrew says the 10 million and more, or definitely in terms of the global growth, that's not the there may be some spell work involved, but it's more New Agey, or Wiccan or neo-pagan, and less, the kind of hardcore cartel sorcerer sort of thing, And you see this; it's not limited to Mexico either. There's groups in Africa where they work with sorcerers for criminal purposes, and that the mafia has actually in Italy, they have some elements that kind of tie into that. They have initiation ceremonies that are very magical, religious oriented, and it's just something that the public doesn't really have a clear grasp on. It's never been really codified or written about in a really open way, I guess.
Yeah, even Black American street gangs use occult symbols, and
exactly.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, and that's and it's it's not a popular topic, and it's something too that, like, unless you have access to that, then you're not really going to see it, because that's not the stuff that, like, it's forefronted. Nobody's going to be hanging out their sorcery. That's definitely like a backroom kind of thing.
Right. When I found out that about kind of like the street gangs and their symbolism, and having some kind of knowledge of, the symbols of Freemasonry, it kind of blew my mind how close it is.
Yeah. And it's it's like you guys were saying, the idea that it's an organizing factor as well. It helps organize the group. It's a group identity thing, and that's actually where Robert Bunker's research gets really interesting, because what the military and the FBI are concerned about is, does it act as an amplifier for violent behavior? There's been discussions of human sacrifice that may or may not be tied to Santa Muerte, and there's rumors of some pretty bloody and violent initiation rituals, which gang initiations a lot of times are bloody and violent anyway. So it doesn't, it may not even be that Santa Muerte really amps it up that much, but the idea of having a death saint over that, it makes folks worried that we may be seeing something that's going to, take it up a notch, where it's already in North Mexico, and the cartel violence is insane. So, the worry is that this will be some sort of like amplification of that. It hasn't happened yet, really. The human sacrifice stories and that they pop up every once in a while, but it's no more frequent than human sacrifices in the news. That sounds weird, but it's not. You don't have a significant amount more human sacrifice. It's it just so happens that these human sacrifices have some element of the person being a devotee or something.
When was the first time you really encountered it in your personal life, or was it through studying?
Yeah, well, it was interesting. I saw a news story in 2005, and it was because the like you were saying, the idea of this Grim Reaper, this skeleton saint, it's pretty picturesque. It's pretty eye catching. And so the news, when this, in 2001 it goes public, and then by 2005 there was a couple other cult, and I don't mean that in like a pejorative way, but there, it is the Santa Muerte. They call it the cult of Santa Muerte. So it just means body, the body of worship for Santa Muerte. So there were a couple other cult leaders that had arisen in Mexico City outside of Dona Queta, who really isn't a cult leader. She's kind of just a very charismatic devotee that the news has, kind of glommed onto, and that she happened to have this street shrine that a ton of people went to. But there were some other folks. I believe his name is David Romero. He got sentenced to 666 years in jail for
wow.
For I think extortion and kidnapping. But he had a temple in Mexico City that was kind of attempting to commercialize and sort of centralize worship. And there was another fellow, Jonathan Vargas, who ended up being killed and turning into San Pedrino or Commandant Pantera, which is Commander Panther or Commander Lion. He was another figure that kind of rose up. He had a radio show and a heavy media presence, and he was using Santa Muerte to kind of challenge the status quo. Also, he was, from his books, it seems he was doing some sorcery for hire for different people. But yeah, so there were these different figures that kind of rose up. So it started to become a lot more prevalent in the streets of Mexico City. And some photojournalists went down there and started doing stories. So 2005, it may have been a Time magazine piece, but I just saw these pictures of these processions, which I think Breaking Bad had the people, doing crawling on their knees to the chapel. And
I remember that.
And so, they were parading with these massive, like life-size skeletons in this Catholic processional, and I was just like, what is this? This is crazy. And my interest, in college, I did cognitive philosophy and comparative religions with the focus on folk magic. So this to me was just like, this was the ultimate form of that, So I became really fascinated by it and kind of tracked it over the years. And the news stories were always, very standoffish on it, confused by it. There were some military reports that came out. I think in 2005, there was a report from the Army War College on it. And, I read everything I could get my hands on it. And then in 2012, Andrew Chestnut published his book. And at that time, I was the books review editor for The Revealer, which is New York University's Religion and Media Studies journal. It's an online web journal. And when his book came out, I was like, oh, this is great. Like, this is the first English language treatment of it, and so I got an interview with him. And then shortly after that, we were invited to come up to the Morbid Anatomy Library in Brooklyn and do a panel discussion on it. And then Andrew and I started working together on a digital end of this, which is the skeletonsaint.com site, and kind of tracking it and using Facebook and using social media to get to know devotees and kind of have conversations and see how this tradition was growing. So, it was about 2005 that really I saw it. And when I saw it the first time, my initial thought was a death cult in Mexico. There is absolutely no way that I will be able to study this in the way that I want to. And it's amazing now to look back on that because, I've become so immersed in the study of Santa Muerte in a way that I never, ever thought that would happen.
Well,
so
probably, where you are, you can probably, even if you're in a pretty rural area, but you can probably walk into a shop and you can find a Santa Muerte candle.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you go to, any kind of Mexican market, any flea markets that have a large Latin American presence, you can find you can find all the paraphernalia, T-shirts, the whole deal. And I was up until 2011, I was living in the Chicago area, so it was everywhere. I could drive down the street and just go to markets and flea markets and stuff and find it and talk to people. And it's been interesting where I'm at now because I'm in rural Georgia, a little ways outside of Athens. And I was in Goodwill one time in Athens, and this lady was, she was this middle-aged lady was there, and she was wearing a Santa Muerte shirt. And I walked up to her and asked her about it, and sure enough, she was a devotee, and that's Athens, Georgia. So it's everywhere. Anywhere there's Latin American folks, you've got Santa Muerte somewhere there.
As far as the criminal aspect of it is, I guess it could be used as like kind of an intimidation tactic as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been some interesting cases in Tennessee as well. I think actually was one of them where where they were using Santa Muerte basically as a as a way to extort people, you know. So you would have the sorceress use of Santa Muerte and the kind of like threats, you know, of if you don't give me the money, you know, the Saint Death is coming after you, and I'm a powerful, you know, wizard. And so,
I guess what would it be? Brujo.
Yeah, Brujo or Bruja. Yeah. And that's where it, you know, that's where it ties into the practice of brujeria. And there are separate traditions within that, of working the saint in that way. You know, that kind of, again, it's different than there's a devotional tradition. There's a tradition within Mexican witchcraft and Caribbean witchcraft and South American witchcraft. And it's interesting too, because she's also spread into different traditions where Santeros will work with her, even though she's not naturalized to the Orisha. So she's popped up in some work, and, you know, they'll start working with her. But, you know, a lot of Santeria people will, you know, that wouldn't at all be anything they would ever think to do. But, you know, in some houses she's popped up, and the same thing with Budun and that, where not naturalized to Haiti at all, and yet she'll pop up in a ceremony or in a possession case, and then they start working with her.
There was a case in Clarksville, not too far from here where we are in Nashville. There, I think from a couple of years ago, there was a guy that, I guess that he was being held in a trailer by somebody, and they were trying to sacrifice him to Santa Muerte.
Yeah, I read about that one. Yeah. And that's, you know, and that's where the kind of the worry comes in, because you know, obviously these things are pretty loose. So if somebody gets it into their mind that Santa Muerte said to kill, and they really believe it, you know, it can get pretty hairy, you know. Whether or not that person would have had that idea with something else, you know, is, you know, you can't really tell after the fact. But yeah, there's been a lot of cases like that. And obviously the news loves that. Like that's something that the news really wants to jump on. We had that.
Sensational.
Yeah. There was a news story in Atlanta, I think this month, which was just, it was completely absurd. They were talking about how Santa Muerte is popping up everywhere in Atlanta now, which is stupid, because I've been here since 2011, and, you know, one of the first things I did was look for Santa Muerte, and she was here. So, you know, it's not popping up, like, it's been here. So, and you can literally go to like a local, like, you know, there's a gas station in Athens. They don't have they at least out in the open. I haven't asked them, because it's a, you know, I want to go back there, and if they didn't, like, that could turn like really bad. But like sometimes shops will have it in the back room, you know, because of the way it looks, and they don't want to be marginalized by that. But they had Jesus Malverde pendants like right out in the open. So it's like, you know, the stuff isn't popping up. It's like right there. It's like at this, you know, at the gas station down the street. You just, you know, if you look for it and you know what to look for, you can find it, you know.
Well, I always get nervous too whenever like there's like media sensationalism against a you know, seemingly strange new religious movement or something, just because, you know, I mean, religious freedom is really, you know, supposed to be really big to us. And like, we had like I think a Central American folk magic practitioner who was like, there was a big criminal case and all this and a big thing on the news, but I was like, what's the difference between what they're doing and what a million, you know, backwoods preachers are doing out here, you know? Like, because people were giving her money and stuff. Well, yeah, that's what usually happens. You know?
Like, right. That's exactly,
It makes me
Joel Osteen.
Yeah, it makes me kind of upset when I see that.
Stuff like that always happens in immigrant groups, especially, you know, like my mother, tells me that her grandmother was kind of like a fortune teller for the community, you know,
right?
The Greek community in Wisconsin, that little community there. So, I mean, these things always tend to happen with like newly immigrant groups.
Yeah, and that's where you get, that's been the interesting thing, looking at Santa Muerte, because it is so outside of things and you can really track it, is seeing that and then seeing the commonalities to so many things that people just look over and don't think about, or they're just like, oh, that's the weird thing that the rural people do, or that's, Pentecostals and we don't think about that.
Right.
And living in rural Georgia, a lot of people will say that Santa Muerte comes to them in their dreams, and then, they become devotees. Well, if you talk to Pentecostals or charismatic Christians, they have dreams about Jesus telling them stuff all the time, and like, stories about, well, that's how I received the Holy Spirit, was I had this dream, and then, I went and did it. So it's, it's the same exact narrative. It's just one is, somewhat culturally acceptable in the US, and the other looks like it's alien and weird in other, when really it's really similar in the experience and then the narrative of it,
It's my ex-wife was from Brazil, and she grew up evangelical, and I can remember one time she just picks up the Bible, closes her eyes, opens it to a certain page, and I asked, well, what are you doing? She says, well, this is how I read the Bible. I just open it up and I just go to a certain page, and this is what God tells me, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I'm just thinking to myself, well, that's using the Bible as a divination tool, essentially.
Yeah. It's actually called bibliomancy. Yeah, there's a divination name for it. Yeah. Yeah, and that's, and it's become it's amazingly common, and it's interesting too, because evangelical, in terms of their denominational beliefs, like that's completely against doctrine, and yet it's within the within the folk tradition is something that happens all the time,
Right. And you get into Pentecostalism, that's when you get some really strange things.
Snake handlers and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, like this whole idea that they can manifest gold and raise people from the dead. And
there's a whole, well, if you go on Facebook and type in dead raisers.
Yeah.
There are groups that like have, someone will die and they'll post in there like, so-and-so has died. I need you to pray for them to be raised. And it's like, I'm in some of the groups, so it pops up on my feed, and like it's weekly, if not daily, so it's not, and again, it seems odd that there's people that are doing that, but it's big enough that it's on Facebook with a group that like probably has at least 1,000 or more people in it, that are doing this on the regular, and that's not even the like global tradition, that's not even the people that aren't on Facebook or who are doing it and, not in that group. So yeah, these are beliefs that are, still prevalent and around, and but in Christianity, not just, some othered tradition.
But these are some of the same people that will say, well, the stuff that the Catholics do, venerating the Virgin Mary, that's so weird. Or all the saints, it's just so weird. But yet they'll do just as weird stuff. It's very, there's definitely kind of like a cognitive dissonance there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's, Jeffrey Kripal talks about religious studies as you have to die 2 deaths. You have to die to what you believed in, and then you also have to die to what you replace that belief with. And then once you've gotten over those 2 hurdles, you can start to look at the world in a way where you go, oh, okay, there's all these different traditions and there's all these different belief structures. And then there's phenomena that happens that those belief structures kind of hang on, and start to kind of look at that.
Have you had any personal encounters with it, Adam? Have you just seen the candles and stuff, or have you known any devotees?
Santa Muerte?
Yeah.
I've just seen the candles and stuff like that. I haven't said, I've known Mexican people, none of which that I know. I mean, maybe they have a passing knowledge of it, or they just didn't tell me.
Well, because it's new. I grew up in Phoenix with a lot of Mexican immigrant community, and I don't remember seeing any of it as a child, but around the turn of the century here, I started seeing the candles, but then I didn't really get close to it until I was working in construction, and we'd have a bunch of crews of Central Americans and Mexican immigrants. And this one guy in particular, I would see, like, he'd be wearing like a wife beater shirt or something. And I would see his little, like, the edge of the tattoo. I was like, oh, that's Santa Muerte. And then one day I was like working, I was like walking by his work van, and I looked in the van, and I like kind of got taken aback because they had like a Halloween kind of cloak mask with a skull on it, you know? He had it like hung up behind the seats.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh, crap. But that's something you talked about, too, is that they repurpose a lot of this pop culture imagery and like heavy metal imagery and stuff. And turn it into shrines and turn it into devotee symbolism.
Because, and that's something that's another thing that, I think
we've got a special guest appearance by a bird, by the way.
Yeah, that's a whippoorwill. Welcome to Georgia. Welcome to the backwoods here. Once it gets to be about like 3 a.m. and that thing's going, and it's just like piercing through the windows, it's not fun. But there, it stopped. It heard me. It was like, okay, I'll stop. It's really interesting because, in terms of in the U.S., a lot of it has been kind of like an upper middle class curiosity. And so people have the money to go and buy statues and, all these different candles and all the rest of it. But, Santa Muerte being a patroness of the margins, that's not always the case, especially in Mexico City and like in Tepito and that, like, folks don't have money to throw around on stuff. So you see the use of just basically whatever is available to kind of do that. There's devotees that have been around Santa Muerte for longer than the popular movement, and they get kind of upset because of the amount of commercial paraphernalia that's available, because to them the tradition was that you made your icon, or your icon was made by a devotee, and it was given to you as kind of an initiation. And so, one step out of that is repurposing anything that had a Grim Reaper on it. And so it's been one of the things that I was really fascinated with early on was that, you could go to Walmart, and the same t-shirt that they were selling in their t-shirt thing, which was on, it was a Grim Reaper image. You could go to Mexico City, and that Grim Reaper would have Santa Muerte written under it, and it would be a devotional t-shirt. Whereas, at Walmart, it was just like right next to the other skulls and the, like whatever, like Rainbow Cat and the rest of it, So it was just really fascinating to see the way that these, in our commercial world, in our capitalist world, these images, they just get like churned around and repurposed. And, one of those purposes was Saint Death, who was this very notorious, for a lot of people, frightening figure. And yet there it was at Walmart, for $4 in the discount t-shirts, So I've had where some of the images that I made, some of the collages that I made for Skeleton Saint, because they're available in Google Images and that. And I was, in all these different Santa Muerte groups on Facebook, I would see them pop up with prayers written on them and a watermark for different groups from around Mexico and Central America. And it was amazing. It was great. I was like, that's, what an honor that like this image that I created for the site, just to illustrate a point or something, now becomes a devotional image and gets, repurposed and taken into the tradition itself.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's the cross. It's a cross fertilization.
Yeah.
Were you gonna say, Sergio? Were you?
Oh, well, I was going to say, you mentioned the Vargas guy who's become a saint, and he was part of something that I guess is there are more organized aspects of this. People are trying to organize it into, I guess the main one is the Santa Muerte International.
Yeah. Yeah, he founded that, and he built the thing that really pissed off the authorities was that he built, I think it's 75 feet tall, effigy of Santa Muerte at the temple that he had. And that's in Tultalan. And he, he had weekly gatherings, where he would have a megaphone and would be, basically chastising the authorities for not helping people and for being corrupt, and talking about the corruption in the local government and that kind of thing, in front of this 75-foot tall effigy. He got gunned down in a pretty brutal way. And his mother, Enriqueta Vargas, was, up to that point kind of worried about his devotion to Saint Death and wasn't really into it at all. She considered herself a pretty standard Catholic. But when he got gunned down, she turned to Santa Muerte and said, if you bring me my son's killers, if you avenge my son's death, I will raise you up as a global figure, and I will bring you to the world, and I will have them respect you. And so, time passes. She feels that's been done, that her, some amount of reciprocity for her son's death has been done. And she takes the tradition and turns it into, from what I've seen, and I don't know it's always difficult when you're talking about this kind of stuff, because I don't know if, 5 years down the line, it's going to turn out that there was a bunch of hidden bad crap that was going on. But, on the outer surface, she has done a prison ministry, helping folks that are in jail. She's done addictions counseling, and really turned Santa Muerte International into a force for good and for helping people. She's passed away recently this year, and or the end of last year, so fairly recently. But Santa Muerte International has there's a guy in the UK that is a representative. He's from the UK. He's not he's a British guy. No Mexican ancestry whatsoever. And he represents Santa Muerte International there. Arlie, up in the Bronx, she is a representative of Santa Muerte International. My friend Hank Vine, who's from East Texas, just a guy from East Texas, he's involved to a certain extent, not so much just because he doesn't like organizations, but he would visit regularly when he was down in Mexico City, and knew Enriqueta very well. Hank's whole vision of Santa Muerte is as a charity, as a very positive force of blessing in the world. And that's been his experience of it, and Santa Muerte International was an organization. It's, and still is, that is, very centralized. She never tried to take it and turn it into something that overlorded over other devotees. But she did centralize Santa Muerte for the organization, and then also, keep out the narco elements and the criminal elements, and what she saw as the satanic elements.
So sounds like she was using it for good, for in its good aspect, I suppose.
From everything that I've seen, and again, like I said, I don't know if 10 years down the line, it'll come out that there was some horrible dark underbelly to it. But
right.
From everything that I've seen, it was a positive, and still is a positive force.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Oh no, yes.
Well, I was going to say that some of the symbols associated with her. Now, saying the vestments that she wears, or the colors, there's a red version, and I guess that has to do with what is being asked of her.
Yeah, and that's a new variant. So once it became into a very public devotional tradition, different statues of different colors had different associations. Originally, it seems like there was red, black, and white, The red was for love work or work that had to do with controlling emotions and that. Black had to do with either protecting against evil or causing evil, depending on how you were going to work it. And then white had to do with purity and cleansing and more of a meditative kind of side to it, more of the blessings and that kind of stuff. Since it's gone to the public, there's also gold, which obviously is money, green, which has to do with justice. So folks that are, you see like conjure candles, hoodoo candles that are like law keep away, or, get out of jail candles and stuff like that. So the green Santa Muerte statue had to do with that. There's brown, which I think is addiction. Purple, which has to do with psychic abilities, so divination and increasing intuition in that. And then there's the seven colors, which fits with the 7 African powers and is kind of like another sort of like all-powerful blessing candle, and obviously represents a kind of syncretism with Santeria traditions and more Caribbean traditions.
And she also carries a scythe, which I suppose that could be self-explanatory in the Grim Reaper tradition, but also
and it's
globe
interesting
as well.
Well, and that's an interesting thing too, is because originally she carried a scale and a globe.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the scythe came in later, but the first images of her are with scales and a globe, and then and the scythe can be interpreted in different ways depending. It gets really complex when you start talking about the actual like working tradition with these things, because you have your icon or your effigy on your altar, and then depending on how you have your altar arranged, if the more you know how to work with the saint, the more the arrangement is going to have to do with what you're asking her to do, even in the offerings and that. And then also how you arrange the statue, how you arrange the scythe, which hand the scythe is in, all that kind of, depending on how nuanced the understanding is with the person working the altar, will have a communication for what the intention is. So yeah, the scythe can be either to, remove, bad, or it could be to harm an enemy, or it could be to harm the person who's trying to harm you, or it could be protection. And there's different kind of narrative elements that go with it. Like her cloak is sometimes talked about in terms of her cloak being something that you can work with to kind of overshadow you and protect you. It gets pretty detailed in the way that the narrative plays out for all these elements. There's also the owl, which is a lot of times seen in her statues and that, and the owl has connections to brujeria. Owls are connected to witchcraft in Mexico, but also, and I think this is what gets mixed up, a lot of kind of a naive academic view of it goes in and tries to find these like traditional, like, okay, well, we have these traditions of the owl being tied to witchcraft in Mexico, and so this owl obviously has to do with witchcraft and whatever. But if you go into a botanica, they've got books on New Thought stuff, they've got books on parapsychology, they've got books on tarot, they've got books on the Tetragrammaton, they've got Eliphas Levi translations of grimoires. And so, what the symbols mean, it's really up to the devotee and what they, kind of how they've integrated the tradition. And that's something that I've tried to highlight is, there's an academic view of it that tries to get real, like this is the true tradition, and there's even in the popular sense where people feel like they need to go to something authentic. And so they'll make these hard lines about, what the tradition means in Mexico and all that. But if you go into a botanica and you actually talk to people who are devotees from Mexico and who work with this stuff, their resources are vast in terms of what they're integrating with the tradition. And the New Age is so huge. Mexico had its own New Age tradition, that paralleled the United States's, and, had exchanges with the United States New Age since like the 1800s, because you had Kardecian Spiritism is huge in Brazil, and the French influence and all that. So you have all these different traditions that people may not think are there, have been there, for as long as they've been in the U.S. So, Eliphas Levi, which is, folks know from like Crowley and from Golden Dawn and that kind of stuff, that was available in Mexico as well. So their understanding of these things is not simply based on, folk tales and like, holdovers from Mesoamerican traditions. Like there's a heavy European influence that is available and has been available for, a long time. So it gets real complex in looking at it, which to me is more interesting, once you start to see like, oh, wow, like there's these whole, there's a New Age for Mexico that is similar but completely different than the New Age we have here,
Right. Different cultural traditions, different religious traditions. Yeah.
Yeah. Blending in and mixing in with it, and that's where you see like pentagrams and stuff that are associated with Santa Muerte, which some of them have a Wiccan interpretation, but a lot of them have again, drawing on the Eliphas Levi stuff and the grimoire stuff. There's a lot of kind of grimoire work that goes into it as well, that is blended in with the tradition. And that also comes in terms of, when you've got these sorcerers for hire that are doing stuff, whether it's for cartels or just regular folks, like you said, Adam, you're talking about your grandma doing, divination for the Greek community. When you have these different people that are spiritual workers within the community, depending on what their understanding is, then becomes kind of the understanding of the devotees that center around that and who listen to them as a teacher.
Yeah, this could be a group of like maybe 15 people, just as small as that. Is there any association to Santa Muerte to Hecate?
No, that's, maybe like in terms of like neo-pagan adoption, there's been a lot of confluence of Hecate and Kali and Diana and, various goddess figures. But Santa Muerte from Mexico is a folk saint. So nothing to do with goddesses, nothing to do with any of that kind of stuff. In terms of, I did a piece called Santa Muerte or Saint Death and the Queen of Elves, because there are some interesting parallels in terms of, if you look at if you go back and look at the prayers to Hecate, from like the Greek magic papyri and stuff like that, there's some common ground in how the phenomenological experience of devotees to these figures, there's definitely similarities there. And, Hecate being herself a kind of figure that exists as a, tripartite and working with these marginal areas and liminality and that, there's definitely a phenomenological similarity. But until you get until you get that syncretism from someone who's neo-pagan or that, you don't really have that. And that's where it gets complicated too, because it's like, if you're going to do the religious studies version, no. If you're going to do the devotee version, maybe, it definitely could be, and then it gets interesting too, because, the Caribbean, right, had, because of the English being there and the French in that, and because of the slave trade, and because of the spice trade and all that, you have in the Caribbean and parts of Mexico, you actually have Indian population from India that were there, and that, so you do have a naturalized Kali, not Santa Muerte, but in Africa, some of the Vodun practitioners have paintings of Shiva, in there, and these are traditional. Like, this isn't like, this didn't come off a TV or something like that. Like, this is really like they've had it there for a while because of the trade routes, and that you had people from India transmitting their traditions there. And when you have practitioners who are actually working the saint or working these traditions, when practitioners meet, they don't meet in a way where it's like, you're not my religion, get away from me. They meet in a way where they're like, well, I do this work. What work do you do? Oh, that's interesting. Well, how does this work for you? And so there's a blending, and so you do have, there is that, but it's not common. And it starts again with a single practitioner or a group of practitioners, and then spreads from there. So it never really makes it to the full public tradition, but and also because it's a folk saint, people kind of do what they want. So, if they felt called to Kali or Hecate or whatever, and they read about it and they worked with it, or they had a dream and they thought that was what was speaking to them, they'll put that on their altar, and that's another thing with the idea of authenticity or tradition, with folk saints and with folk practices, it's what works. So, if Kali worked for him, Kali's going on the altar. And if Hecate works for him, Hecate's going on the altar. Like, they don't question that,
How does the institutional Catholic Church?
Oh, they hate it. Yeah,
Do they hate it?
Yeah, they hate it. They've made, at this point, they've made multiple official declarations of Santa Muerte as satanic, and it has no part in the Catholic Church.
Do you think that just promotes the popularity more than anything?
Yeah, it definitely plays on a division, and folks that are sick of the Catholic Church, especially now with the abuse trials and the terrible way that the Catholic Church has handled that, and people who've experienced it, and that definitely plays a part where it's like, well, you guys suck, so if you don't like it, this has to be better than this, like Arlie's experience where she went into confession and was told she had no place there. Well, she turned to Santa Muerte, There's some Aztec revivalism in, it's called like the Reconquest. So the kind of like nationalism for Mexico and for Latin America. And Santa Muerte plays into that through the idea that she's connected to the Aztec goddesses of death, or goddess of death. And so folks obviously going that route don't want anything to do with the Catholic traditions. And so Santa Muerte then steps in as a figure that can very publicly and very outwardly and very strongly say, I'm not Catholic, But a lot of devotees in the popular tradition consider themselves good Catholics, and they see nothing wrong with it. And that's right. Throughout the Catholic world, in areas that are largely Catholic. There's folk traditions that the church kind of turns a blind eye to, and the people think they're good Catholics and they go to church and they do whatever, but then in private they work with saints in a way that's definitely not Orthodox.
Seems like there's that political aspect to it too, like the way that Vargas was using it to petition for change in the community, and how you have this historical relationship of the Catholic Church with the power structures. So yeah, she can be seen, I guess, as kind of subversive also.
Yeah, absolutely. And also as a patron or patroness of the margins, all of those people have not fared well under the status quo.
Right.
So definitely that element of standing for the downtrodden and standing for people who have not been given a fair hand in life.
It's just so fascinating because we're in such what seems on the surface a materialist technological world, but religion is still alive and well, and religious fires are still sweeping the world. It's still changing and evolving. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, and it's, again, like talking about Jeffrey Kripal's work and that, and a lot of kind of new scholarship looking at almost like an occult or magical revival, in the sense that, this again goes back to stepping away from belief and religion you still have the phenomena, right? People still have these dreams that are heavily symbolic and that seem to have precognitive elements and that seem to have elements that, you know, miracles are granted and whatever. So, you know, no matter how much technology is there, there's still the human element, and the human element always has this weird ground where it's like, this stuff seems to work, you know? And so those things then, when they seem to work, they find houses, and those houses are quite often, you know, something like Saint Death or, you know, some other belief system that sort of provides a framework to understand why that stuff is happening, you know? So whereas, you know, somebody might do, you know, they might consider themselves psychic and be perfectly happy saying like, well, yeah, I did a precognitive, you know, vision and I saw this was going to happen. Whereas someone might not feel comfortable with saying that, and they'll say, well, Jesus told me in a dream that this was going to happen, or Jesus whispered it, or the Holy Spirit, you know, moved me to do that. And so these narrative structures kind of sit around basic experiences that continue to happen for people, whether or not, you know, the technology exists. And one of the interesting things with technology, you know, the synchronicities and stuff that happen with technology, you know, they continue to kind of spark that fire and say, hey, there's something weird going on here. You know, like when you're thinking something and you sign into Twitter and the first tweet you see is related to what you were thinking, you know, that gets people thinking that there might be something more than, you know, just base materialism at work.
Weird synchronicities and such. Yeah, and, you know, the thing with the, you know, when I was reading the Wikipedia article about Santa Muerte and this association with the owl, of course, this immediately, owls keep coming up in like the strangest places, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know,
that was
Mike Cleland, you know, his work on owls and synchronicities and all this.
Yeah.
And,
well, there's a really powerful section in Kripal and Whitley Strieber's book, The Supernatural, where Strieber's talking about the owl symbolism. And he's talking about the owl as a predator that comes in the night. And if you read it, I read it while I'm knee deep or neck deep or drowning in Santa Muerte research. And it was almost as if he was talking about this, you know, death saint rising up. And it was just really eerie to read that, you know, and again, just tied with that symbol of the owl, you know, maybe a completely spurious like connection, but, you know, because of what I was looking at, it had this potency, you know?
Yeah. And very strange story that, when we did our interview with Diana Pasuka, as I was leaving Seraphiel's house that night, this owl just like flies right across my car.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was weird.
Wow. Yeah. Cause you know, yeah, that's intense. Mitch Horowitz, when he was editing The Supernatural, he had a ton of owl experiences tied to that. And like, yeah, that was weird. It's a weird thing. I don't know.
Let's talk about something that is a little changing the subject a little closer to home for you. And that's the Georgia Guidestones. You and I talked extensively about this at Paramania.
You had the deep secrets. You had the truth, the Georgia Guidestones truth.
Did you get a chance to watch the documentary?
I did not. I was able to watch the. I'm terrible. Like I get home from work and like collapse or become obsessed with something. So I was able to watch the preview for it. And I do intend on watching it, but I did not have a chance to watch the actual documentary itself. So we will have to rely on your knowledge and my local knowledge.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's talk about your local knowledge first, because, you know, you had this, because it's that sparked it, because what sparked our conversation was you were talking about some article that was written in Australia talking about it's like some of that they were saying it was an evil thing, or that it was.
Yeah, well, it was a Daily Grail article that Greg Taylor wrote about a town right outside of the Guidestones called Dewey Rose. And he was writing all this stuff about the alchemical symbolism of the Dewey Rose and the Guidestones and Rosicrucians and all this stuff. Well, I live like fairly close to there, and Dewey Rose is like literally a cinder block post office and nothing. Right. So like if it's a Rosicrucian headquarters,
maybe it's underground.
That's amazing.
It's
like yeah, exactly.
Base.
Yeah.
Right.
That's it. It may be like the most like
complex, huge, sprawling.
Yeah. I need to go I need to dive deeper into it.
It's like Dulce, they're everything's
right, right.
Just find a manhole.
Yeah,
just go in the post office, down the stairs, and
I need the right code, and they'll open the gate to the underground caverns.
Well, obviously it's 666. That's all you got to
right. Yeah, right. Yeah, bring the child for sacrifice, and I'm let in. Like, yeah. So it was, to me, I was reading that, and I was like, man. And then like right after that got written, there was a Craigslist ad in the Athens Craigslist, which was from QAnon, calling for people to destroy the Georgia Guidestones. And my first thought was like, I live close to here. Like, I don't want that. Like, come on, guys. Like, chill out. And it's articles like that like spur that kind of stuff. And there's already been vandalism, and like the folks around here have a hard enough time. Like the poverty level is crazy, so I'm just thinking of the locals who are like just trying to live their lives and like
sure
go to church on Sunday.
It's a good tourist attraction, so it's probably contributes to the economy a lot.
Kinda, but they it's a tourist attraction for like folks on like a road trip and stuff. But like if you go out, there's no hotels really out there. Like they don't have the infrastructure in the town to attract tourists. So if you go there, like you go up to a hill in a cow pasture with the Guidestones, and that's it, and there's no really hotel to go to. You could eat at a local restaurant, maybe if it was open. They close at 5. So, it's like get there too late, like, nah, maybe not, and there's the museum that you could go to, which is, they maybe get like, I don't know what the admission fee, like $5, $10. So it's not really a big attraction. And to some extent, and I think this is kind of covered in the documentary a little bit from what I saw on the promotional reel, was, it's kind of an embarrassment at this point to a certain extent. Like they wish it was a tourist attraction, but it's kind of become the thing of where they've got to have a camera on it 24 hours to make sure that people aren't there either thinking it is something evil. So they're there to like, I'm a Satanist and I'm 14 and I need to sacrifice a cat on this thing. Or they're there to like destroy it and spray paint it and, write like things about the New World Order taking over. And then they've got to clean it up. So the $10 they made on the person at the museum, now it has to be, $1,000 to go and sandblast and do whatever it takes to get epoxy off of it, so, yeah, just having like living by it, like I have a different perspective on it. And then also talking to folks, because again, this area is not a very rich area. So, folks have been here for long enough to remember when those things were built. And, especially local store owners and that. A friend of mine owns an antique store out here and he's been here, his family's from here. So he completely remembers when it was built. And it was local Masons who like helped, but it was local Masons who helped because it's Georgia. And like, if you own a business at that time period, you were probably a Mason, unless you were Southern Baptist. So like, and even then, like probably a Mason. So like, it was not, that wasn't a scary deal. That was like, that's just the culture. People are Masons, and so, that element wasn't scary, and it was, there's things like the pole star was drilled in properly. Like the hole for the pole star had to be re-drilled because when they installed it, it didn't line with the pole star. So it's like, this idea that it's this grand, like massive global conspiracy. Well, in the pyramids, they got it right. But this grand conspiracy in the 80s couldn't get the pole star drilled properly. Like that's a little off. It's just, and spelling, the pseudonym is spelled wrong. And it's like, oh, well, that's encoded in something else. And it's like, well, no, if you're around here, they may have just spelled it wrong. Like that may have just been a misspelling. Like that's kind of the way things roll around here.
And
like
plus,
it's not.
Plus, I don't think that there's actually a time capsule
No, yeah,
I think they forgot.
exactly.
They either forgot to put it there, or they just totally just because it says to be opened on blank.
Right.
Well,
yeah. It just
there's nothing there. You know.
Well, they ran out of money because there was also supposed to be lunar stones. I had a joke with my friend Joe Matheny, who did the Onyx hat thing. I was like, man, we should get like a GoFundMe and like, you know, put the lunar stones in. You know, like let's finish the Guidestones. Let's have like a, you know, like a GoFundMe to finish the Guidestones. But yeah, so
just
it was
be part of the conspiracy, David.
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I am right. Like I'm one of the Illuminati Rosicrucians that live out in rural Georgia. Yeah.
You probably own that
you know.
pressure washing business, huh?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I stoke the fires so that I get paid. You know, like come and deface the monument, so I get a couple grand.
Well, people can listen to the episode we did with Dr. Future back in 2015, I think it was, that we talked about this. And Mike, you know, our good friend Mike, he pretty much is the one that figured it out. In my opinion, really, he figured it out. And really what it was built by basically these guys that were essentially, I guess you could call them eugenicists, but really white supremacists.
Yeah.
Really? I mean, that's what they were. This wasn't a big Illuminati conspiracy. You know, I saw something that the other day, I guess it was a QAnoner posted it that said that, you know, that this really is it's the blueprint for the socialist New World Order. And I had to just like face palm because I know that that's not what it is. It was actually the other side of the political spectrum that put this thing up.
Yeah.
These
and
guys
it was,
that they were big like fans of what is his name, Shockley, that invented the transistor radio, that came up with all these different things about how, you know, blacks are stupid and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, they all had these ideas of like, basically, well, you know, what we're hoping to happen after the nuclear war is basically the white race survives and we can rebuild. I mean, that's essentially their idea.
yeah, and that's the time period too. You look at, well, and there's the book that's associated with it as well, which I don't even think the museum has anymore. But it's very much a Cold War. You know, this is what we need after the
Right.
After the nuclear holocaust. Like these Guidestones will stand and like allow civilization to rebuild itself on these principles. So it has a Cold War element to it, you know, which, and again, I think, you know, it's like these things are much more interesting. Like this is much more real, and like white supremacy in the South, that makes sense. You know, like globalist conspiracy, like we don't even have globalists now. You know, like, I mean, it's still like especially in Georgia, like it's still very much a you know, nationalist, if even that, like more like Georgiaist, you know. They're not thinking on a global level. They're trying to, but, you know, so yeah, I think that the actual history to it is much more interesting. And they were from like the Midwest too, wasn't it? Like Iowa. Ohio or something? Iowa. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
it was,
I mean,
Fort Dodge, I think, Iowa. I may be wrong, or Dodge City or something like that.
And as far as them being Rosicrucians, they were probably just members of AMARC, you know, I mean, got their mail order packets and, you know.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, even that, because that's the thing, you know, the interesting thing about Rosicrucianism is the diversity of it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, because there's so many different Rosicrucian orders, and they may have been Masons and been, you know, if there's a Christian, degree working that you can do that is the Rosicrucian, or even, I'm forgetting all the masonry things.
Yeah, in Scottish Rite Masonry, there's a Rosicrucian order and a degree.
Yeah, exactly. So that, you know, they could have been that, you know, AMARC was all over the mail, you know, I mean, that was mail order. So like they could have been that. They could have just read the Rosicrucian Manifest. They could have been Francis Bacon fans.
Yeah.
And there's, separate Rosicrucian groups that center around reading Bacon and Shakespeare and stuff like that. I mean, there's so many different ways that it could have been, tied into that.
I think, too, there was an element, because Mike did get something that he found the Rosicrucians had some kind of like vague, kind of almost like they were trying to take credit for it in a way. That's how it kind of read to me.
That could be too. Yeah.
Just with Rosicrucians in Atlanta.
That makes sense. Yeah. Like until you know what it is, like if it's this mystery thing, I'm sure that once the bad press started, and that's another interesting thing too. There's actually a history to the bad press. The bad press didn't start until the internet. It was always, there was some elements of like local people who were like, what is this thing that looks like Stonehenge? Like where the Southern Baptists were like, that doesn't look right, but really there's a history to this thing being hated, which gets amped up with like Bill Cooper, and I don't know that Cooper even knew about it, but that drift of, thinking, and then into Alex Jones and all that, like there definitely like is an amping up of the considering this thing to be some new world order device.
To me, it's this kind of like fascinating yet cheesy roadside attraction is really what it is. But knowing some of the idea, really what is more important to look at is the ideas of the guys that built this, once you know who they were, and how this just really fits in with this whole kind of the American eugenics movement and American fascism, and how that even goes down today, because these guys were later big supporters of David Duke and his presidential campaign.
Right. And that makes more sense for the area, because in between Alberton and Atlanta is Stone Mountain, which was one of the headquarters of the KKK, and there's the Robert E. Lee carving on the side of Stone Mountain, which was funded by the Daughters of the Revolution, and by there was a big campaign by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's either founding editor or one of the editors in the early 20th century was the guy that kind of forefronted this campaign, and I think it's the same guy. Maybe not, but there's a kind of birth of the nation sort of poem called "The Lay of the Gray Minstrel," and it's about Stone Mountain as like this symbol of like Southern aristocracy and like the dream of the South and all of that. And so there's a much deeper history, when you look at it from the angle that you're talking about, that actually ties into all these other things that are going on, and have gone on in the area, which is much more potent and scarier, honestly.
Up to Charlottesville.
Yeah, exactly. It's still something, it's an active force in the world, and that, that was when we talked, like that really, it sunk in, like all these different things that are kind of other signposts for that down here,
Yeah, and the Stone Mountain, you mentioned Birth of a Nation, when that movie came out, that was actually the rebirth of the Klan, and it was at Stone Mountain that the Klan was reorganized in 1915.
Right. And that, again, that's in between Alberton and Atlanta, like straight shot down Atlanta Highway, so that makes way more sense than, for some reason, globalist, Illuminati, Rosicrucian, whatever's come out to the middle of nowhere, Georgia, and make this thing,
But it's not sexy enough. It's not sensational enough. It's
pretty sensational. It could be sensational, but you're right. It's not as magic-y, mystical kind of. It's more dirty and disturbing.
So now, like the QAnon and alt-right have kind of said, well, we're against this thing, but yet it was their ideological predecessors that built it. That's the real
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
It's the early QAnon post, right? Like it's an early QAnon meme. Like it's a pre-QAnon meme, like right out here in rural Georgia.
yeah.
And it's weird too because one funny thing about the Dewey Rose thing. So after we had talked and I said that and was like Dewey Rose, like it's a cinder block building or whatever. So I was out at a local shop here and I was the owner was like, "Oh, my friends just showed up. You need to meet them. They're interested in like similar kind of like weird stuff." And I was like, "Okay." So like I meet this lady and she's a shamanic practitioner from Florida that does like the Michael Harner like shamanic journeying and soul retrieval and that kind of stuff and vision quests and all that. And she starts talking and we're talking and she's like, "Oh yeah, I live, just down the road here. I live just a little ways down." And I was like, "Oh, where do you live?" And she's like, "Oh, Dewey Rose." And I was like, "Oh, really?" And then she goes, yeah, I was in Florida and I had a vision that I needed to go to Dewey Rose, Georgia. And so we moved there and we've got like a farm. So I was like, "Oh, wow, maybe there are Rosicrucians there, but it's not like it's not the ones that people think."
Right, exactly.
So I'll have to report back on that. She invited me to go to the farm and discuss shamanic journeying, but I haven't had a chance. So
Let me know if you find the entrance to the underground.
I may
base.
change my whole story. Like I may come back and be like, "Whoa, I was wrong." Like it's.
And Bigfoot's probably down there too, I'm sure.
Hopefully I'll be riding a Bigfoot. Like, I want to get like the full initiation into the Dewey Rose secrets. Like, yeah.
Well, David, what's next for you, bro? And also, where can people find you and your work?
Well, I've got what's next? I don't know. Looking at weird things.
Always.
That's usually, always is pretty much what I do. I've been getting really excited by space and cybernetics. So I'm hoping to write something more on that because there's a whole history of technology and space that is very strange and interesting. Actually, speaking of Diana Pasulka, I have co-authored paper with her that's coming out in an anthology from Oxford University Press called Believing in Bits, which is about digital technologies and the supernatural. And our piece looks at the visionary history of the internet and kind of the different precursors from Teilhard de Chardin and Marshall McLuhan, and then we take it back to Raymond Lull, who was a visionary in the medieval period, and kind of looking at just the visionary underpinnings, and then on into the SRI psychic work and Jacques Vallée's work on the internet. So it's an interesting piece. That anthology is not out yet. It's scheduled for 2019, but I don't know when that will come out. So I'm hoping to kind of do more work on that.
Please keep us informed on that. That sounds very interesting. That's right up my alley.
Yeah, it's a great, and the anthology's got a bunch of different scholars from all over the place looking at how digital technologies and the supernatural kind of blend together. So all sorts of different stuff from like tulpas to UFOs and all of it. So my blog is davidmetcalfe.wordpress.com, and that's where I publish most stuff. I've got a Medium page that I occasionally publish to. Mostly folks can find me on Twitter. So David B. Metcalfe on Twitter. And yeah, I'm the editor-in-chief for the Windbridge Research Center's Threshold Journal of Interdisciplinary Consciousness Studies. And Windbridge focuses on afterlife studies and mediumship. So if folks are interested in that, they should check out Threshold and Windbridge. But yeah.
Well, excellent.
That's it.
Excellent. Well, we'll end it here, and guys, we'll be back.
Oh, well, and one more thing. I'll be at the Georgia Bigfoot Conference in Rabun County. So if folks want to enjoy some good Southern hospitality in Rabun County, the Georgia Bigfoot Conference is in October, and it will be an interesting event. I don't know what I'm going to be speaking on yet, but I'll try to make it something fascinating and engaging.
Very cool. Excellent. You heard it here, folks. That's a scoop.
Yep, that's right.
All right, guys. We'll be back to close out the show on Conspirinormal. If you want your HR team to hire top talent for your company, tell them about ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter's powerful matching technology identifies people with the right skills, education, and experience, and actively invites them to apply to your company's job posts, so you get qualified candidates fast. It's no wonder that ZipRecruiter is rated #1 by employers in the U.S. This rating comes from hiring sites on Trustpilot with over 1,000 reviews. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/Conspirinormal, which helps us a lot. That's ZipRecruiter.com/Conspirinormal. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire.
Hey, man, you're hiring.
So I'm bringing us in, but
Action.
You don't know what to say.
I don't know what we talked about.
Action mutante.
You don't know what we talked about.
I mean, I do. I just have nothing to add to it or contribute. That's what I mean to say. The Georgia Guidestones have always fascinated me, but I don't know anywhere near as much as you guys do about theories behind it, the meanings behind it, even what it says or represents, that sort of thing.
Well, Santa Muerte.
Yeah.
Santa Muerte, that's something I know even less about.
Well, I don't know a lot about it. I don't know a lot about it either, David.
But it's also really interesting because I have seen
more.
that. I've seen that imagery a lot throughout the years, and just always assumed that it was, just some aspect of South American culture that I didn't know. I didn't realize it was this big sort of underground subculture, sort of a movement.
Right. I'd heard of it, and I'd definitely seen the candles and stuff like that.
Right.
And I think really it was Breaking Bad that really kind of keyed me into it when I about 3 or 4 years ago when I sat down and just binge watched that show, because it's pretty prominent. Because you watch Breaking Bad, didn't you, Rob? I thought you had.
Nope, never seen it.
Yeah, but it's definitely an element because he's going up against Mexican drug cartels and it and such. So you see a lot, what David described of the little procession. My friend down in Atlanta, he told me he was living Roswell, Georgia, and he was living in this complex that had there was a lot of Mexican people that lived there, and he said he was up late one night and he looked over at the little tennis court, and there was some kind of weird procession going on. Yeah, and they were all wearing robes, and he was he didn't know what was happening.
Put the deadbolt on.
Kind of freaked him out. He just looked out the window and just kind of went back and sat down.
But it's the main thing is that our First Amendment is everything, and so it always just makes me nervous when I see the media really demonizing a marginal religious group. It's really not, it's not right. And there's we were talking about, there's just as many, strange sects of Christianity. So, it's not right to pin an entire, religious movement as criminal. And really it being, it being something that attracts the downtrodden is what Christianity is supposed to do. So, criminals and quote bad people, are supposed to be welcomed into the mainstream church also. Jesus is supposed to be for them, supposed to forgive everybody. So, it's
right. Yeah, there's also a little bit of the satanic panic stuff.
Yeah,
because it's a skeleton and because of that.
Spooky imagery.
Yeah, spooky imagery. I mean, we definitely get enough of that every year when, Halloween rolls by.
Oh, yeah.
And you see people, having what is it they do in some of the churches, the hell houses or whatever, where they have people getting abortions and doing drugs and, it gets even more hard.
Party?
it gets even more hardcore in the at the hell houses than it does in actual like haunted houses.
Yeah.
Whereas it's just horror movie motifs. It's like actual real life shit.
Yeah. Damn.
I remember being a kid, and I don't remember where it was, but it was like, it wasn't at my church. We must have went to some other church or something, because I went to a very liberal, like, it was a Lutheran church. And it was, you know, but they were talking about Halloween was coming up, and they were like talking about how, you know, don't let your kids dress up in these horrible Halloween costumes. You know, you should dress them up as shepherds and this and that. And I remember being a kid, and thinking like, what the hell is the fun in that? What? I don't get it. I don't understand like what the problem in like getting dressed up and having fun for a holiday. Like it just blew my mind at the time.
Right. Yeah. I remember all kinds of stuff around Halloween when I was a kid. Like, you remember the whole thing about the razor blades and the apples?
Oh, yeah.
Drugs.
All that kind of
Drugs
stuff.
and the candy.
The I think some of it even like the dirty AIDS needles and, you know, the all kinds of weird all kinds of weird stuff like that. So, Rob, you want to talk a little bit about Game of Thrones, man? Since you and I are the Game of Thrones fans.
I've never seen a single episode.
He's one of those few people that can say that and be proud.
I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not gonna throw any spoilers out there because obviously people are gonna still watch the show and whatever. But I wasn't thrilled with this last season, but I'm not joining the rampage against like the writers to recreate it or, you know, any of that madness. I thought they wrapped it up well. I predicted the ending, most of it anyway. But
so you were pretty satisfied with the end of it?
Yeah, I feel like I can move on with my life. And
yeah. You know,
I mean, I invested a lot into this story. You know, I read the books before I got into the TV show, and when he stopped writing books, that was when I was like, all right, I guess I'll watch the show because he's not writing books and the TV show is passing it. So that was when I started watching it. So it's, you know, it's been like 5 or 6 years in the making, getting to this point. But
well, see, I have a theory that I think that what he did was had them do the TV show so that he could just do a different ending.
That's what I think
and
too.
See how the reaction was going to be.
That's what I keep telling Alyssa, because he had less to do with the writing of the show than with the books. So, like, I think I think you're right. And the story it started to diverge around like season 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So, you know, he's only written up to what, 5, 6 books of the 8?
I think 5. Yeah, I think it's, well,
9,
then it's 6 then.
I think it's actually 9 books.
Because there's 2 more left, right?
Isn't
there's one more and the one after that's supposed to be the last one, as I understand it.
Yeah. But, you know, it had already diverged quite a bit. So that's my theory too, is that he's just like, if he doesn't die before he writes them, it's been 10 years since he wrote a book and he's like 70.
Well, see, I've only read the first book.
They're so good.
And the first book almost was like verbatim to the first season.
First 2 are.
But you've told me that there's a lot of extra characters. There's characters that actually come back from the dead.
There's characters whose storylines are merged in the TV show. There's people that are still alive at the end of season 8 that died in like book 3. Like it's very different.
Right. There's that one that was it Sir Bannister or Barristan is actually still alive in the books. He's the
Thanks for all the spoilers, guys.
No.
Gosh.
No, I think he died the same way as he does in the show.
Okay. Yeah, they were saying that. Well, they were saying something like he was still alive in some of the books. So there's definitely a divergence there. So I don't think that he's gonna. I don't know if it's gonna exactly end the same way.
I doubt.
And how could it?
Why would he do that? Why would he write something that's already been written?
Well, because like they said that all he did was just give like some kind of loose outline to the producers.
Right.
And the thing is, though, like, I don't know, they could have gone any way that they wanted to without having any kind of material. So I wonder if those guys were just good at adapting things, but not good at, you know,
exactly, and
coming up with their own stuff.
Not only that, but they're doing the final Star Wars movie. So there's a lot of people think that they were just like, well, Game of Thrones is over. Let's just get it done, rush through it, and get to working on Star Wars because we're really excited about Star Wars because for some reason, someone still is. And
disgruntled Star Wars fan over here.
Man, I was the biggest Star Wars apologist forever until that last movie came out.
So are you not going to go see what's the last movie going to be?
I don't know. I don't even care. I can't even remember the name of the last movie. Episode 8.
The Last Jedi.
Okay. What a pile of crap.
Is there any thoughts on the interview? Or on Game of Thrones? If you
no thoughts on Game of Thrones.
Or Star Wars.
Nothing that we didn't cover. I mean, it's a turning into a pretty large religious movement, and like I said, I've had personal contacts with devotees who are good people, not criminals. You know, so you know, I just don't like to see the demonization, but I mean, there are criminal elements who are using it to their advantage, just like there are criminal elements using all kinds of religions to their advantage. Just like there's terrorists using religions to their advantage. So, you know.
Governments, yeah.
Sure.
You know, First Amendment comes first here. So, you know, I just don't like anyone persecuting any religion.
And we definitely have a big block in this country that likes to use their religion to impose their power on everybody else.
A little more than Santa Muerte is doing to me.
So what's the real threat here?
Right.
All right. Well, next week, guys, I've got scheduled Aaron Gullius. We're going to talk about some more stuff from his Saucer Life.
Always a pleasure. Great
podcast. Going to get into a little Alternative 3 and the background behind that.
I'll have to watch it by then.
Yeah. Well, I think you can find it on YouTube.
Yeah.
I think it's there. I don't know if it's as good as Game of Thrones, but it's definitely
probably
there.
Better.
It's probably better. Yeah.
Better than season 8.
Better than Star Wars.
But it's the social justice warrior Star Wars. All right, guys. Rob, tell everybody where they can find our Patreon and what they can find there and how to join.
If you go to patreon.com/Conspirinormal, we got several tiers of subscriptions there available. For I believe it's the lowest donation, $1 now, you get all the bonus episodes, and we've got a lot of those up there. A lot of great guests that have hung out with us after the show and talked about a little bit wilder, a little bit more out there ideas, a little more free form, a little less radio friendly sometimes, just fun stuff. If you don't subscribe there, you can help the show with a one-time donation at our website at conspirinormal.com. And if you want to help the show, but you don't want to spend any money doing a 5-star review or just telling your friends about us, is the best way to do that.
All right, absolutely. And we got a 3-star, 2-star review saying that we were Christian propaganda. By the way,
hey,
only 1/3 of us is.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess I'm the Christian propagandist here.
Dang, Adam, you're so close-minded. Well, you
Especially
talk to all
after
these people every week and put these shows out.
Especially after my last statement, I'm a real Christian propagandist. Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much. We'll be back next week on Conspirinormal. Rob, Serafio's got to get you the new theme song.
Yes.
Consider becoming a Patreon at www.patreon.com/Conspirinormal or leave a one-time donation at Conspirinormal.com. And please check out our YouTube channel, Conspirinormal Podcast.